Hey everybody, and welcome back to Character Creation. This is part 4 and the final part of finishing off our first Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition character sheet. Now, in the last video, which I will, if you want to check that out, you can click on the little eye in the top right corner. I will put a card in so you can click straight to that. But in the last part, we did our skills. We talked a little bit about our background and our alignment. This character is real close to being done now. We just need to do a little bit of equipment, work out some of their additional bonuses. But before we go into all of that, there's a couple of little things we need to do just to finish off this character sheet. So underneath your skills, you're going to see a box called Passive Wisdom or Passive Perception. And this is think of it as a kind of always on skill that represents your general awareness of the world around you. And it's often used by your Dungeon Masters to see if you pick up on things like traps, or if you notice somebody who's stealthed or invisible trying to sneak up on you, that sort of thing. The way that we work this out is it is 10 plus your perception skill bonus. The reason it is 10 is considered the average of a d20 roll, because it is half of 20, and then you add your perception skill bonus to represent your natural talent or natural ability in that particular area, and you'll see that your perception skill is just listed in your skills, and you can take your bonus from there. Initiative is next, and you'll find it just nestled between armor class and speed, just above your hit points on your character sheet. Initiative is used to determine the order of combat and who goes first, who goes last, etc. if something dramatic or a fight occurs or anything like that. And it's very simply, it just uses your dexterity modifier. So you just put your dexterity modifier here. It may be that you have a class feature or a feat or a spell or a magic item or something like that that will give you a bonus, but in most cases you're just going to be adding your dexterity modifier unless you have something else that would get added to it as well. Now, above your proficiency bonus box, you'll see a little box called Inspiration. Now, Inspiration is something that the DM can choose to give you as a reward for good role-playing, for example, and it provides you advantage on the next roll that you make. You can choose when to gain advantage, basically. It's an optional rule, and this box is simply used to mark when you have it and when you don't. In most cases, it might not come up, but just so you're aware of what that does, Inspiration is for that. Now, let's get this character finished. We need to start picking our character's equipment, and there's two ways you can really do that. If you go into the character class section, you will see just underneath your skills, where you get to pick what skills you're proficient in, you will see that there is a number of equipment choices. It will provide you things like you can have leather armor and a bow, or chainmail, or you can have a longsword or a ranged weapon or something like that. And it will give you a list of these things, these different choices that you can pick from. You can go through this list, picking whatever option suits you, and then you just write down any equipment gained in the box which is marked equipment just beneath where your attacks go, next to your features and traits. An alternative option is to go to the start of the equipment section on page 143, and in there you will see a table which lists starting wealth by class, and this allows you to randomly roll to see how much starting gold you have, and then you simply go through the various equipment tables for weapons, armor, and miscellaneous equipment, and you buy what you see fit for fitting that character. You still get your background equipment and gold regardless, but you can use this method to kind of more customize your character. You might roll very well and you can start with lots of equipment, or you might roll very badly and you only have a few things, and that can be worked into your character and the elements of how the campaign's beginning. For the purposes of this character, we're just going to take the proposed list of equipment from the fighters section as follows. So, in the fighter section, we have the following choices. Now, first one is we can either have chainmail or leather armor, longbow, and 20 arrows. So, for us, being an archer, being a very dexterity-based character, we're going to probably want to take the leather armor, the longbow, and 20 arrows. Our next choice is between a martial weapon and a shield, or 2 martial weapons. I don't see Serena as being a 2-weapon fighter, and a shield could help us so when we do get into a close combat fight, we don't want to be getting hit, so I think I'm going to take the martial weapon and a shield. Our next choice is either a light crossbow and 20 bolts, or 2 hand axes. We've already got a bow, so I don't feel the need to take the crossbow as well, and 2 hand axes kind of represents, maybe they're kind of like woodsman's tools or something like that, so we're going to take the 2 hand axes. And then finally, we can choose between either a Dungeoneer's pack or an explorer's pack. And these packs contain miscellaneous equipment like torches, rations, water skins, that sort of thing. They're both very similar, but as Serena is more of a woodsy, foresty gnome, we're going to take the explorer's pack instead. Now, one thing to mention here is, going through this list of equipment, it might be that there is something which just doesn't fit your character, or you maybe want to slightly change because you want a particular weapon or a particular sword or something like that. It's absolutely fine to talk to your dungeon master about this. For an example, as a small character, as a gnome, I can't actually use a longbow with Serena, so I might ask my dungeon master, could I change this to a short bow? There's no real balance issue there. It actually is a little bit less damage for me. I can't use the longbow anyway, and so we're going to change the longbow into a short bow. It's just going to make things a little bit easier for us later on. Now, equipment is broken down into 3 sections, as I mentioned earlier. You have armor, weapons, and then miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is the easiest one to talk about, as it represents things that don't usually have or provide bonuses. I'm talking things like torches, rations, ladders, rope, that sort of thing. The exception to this are toolkits, like thieves' tools or mason's tools or something like that. If you use these tools as part of an actional skill check and you are proficient with those tools, you can add your proficiency bonus to whatever it is you're doing. So, for example, if you're a rogue and you want to pick a lock, you would normally make a dexterity check. If you're proficient in thieves' tools, you would also add, and you use thieves' tools to try and pick the lock, you would add your proficiency bonus as well. Armor is pretty simple, and it will form the basic core of your armor class. Now, armor class is used for the Dungeon Master to determine whether a monster hits you or not. If they roll above your armor class, equal to or above your armor class, they hit you. If they roll under your armor class, they miss you, basically. And the way to work it out is actually pretty simple, and it primarily depends on what type of armor you're wearing. Armor comes in 3 different types. You have light, medium, or heavy. If you wear armor you are not proficient in, you have disadvantage on any strength or dexterity, skill checks, or attack rolls that use those abilities, and you cannot cast spells. So it's very important you only wear armor that you are actually proficient in, unless you want to have a severe penalty. Light armor provides the lowest base armor class, but allows you to add dexterity modifiers without any limits, basically. So, for example, if we decided to wear leather armor has a base armor class of 11 plus our dexterity modifier. And this, what armor has what base armor class, is all in the table on page 145 in the player's handbook. I will try and put up a screen grab of it somewhere if I can. And so we look at this table and we see leather armor has armor class of 11 plus dexterity modifier. We would add our dexterity modifier to that, and then that would be our total armor class. That's the way that works out. Medium armor has a slightly better base armor class, but it limits your dexterity modifier to a maximum of +2. So even if we had a +4 dexterity modifier, we would only get to add +2 to our armor class. And this represents the armor being more rigid, weighing more, etc. And some medium armor also imposes disadvantage on stealth checks. So for example, if we were to wear scale mail, for example, our base armor class would be 14 plus our dexterity modifier, but only to a maximum of 2. Heavy armor provides the highest base armor class, but you don't add any bonuses from your dexterity modifier to your armor class. I should point out, however, that it does state in the player's handbook that you don't take any penalties from a negative dexterity modifier either. So if you do have a particularly low dexterity, wearing heavy armor could be the right decision. It almost always imposes disadvantage on stealth checks as well. Finally, if you're proficient, you can use a shield. A shield adds +2 to your total armor class. So you just go simply up to the top with the little shield icon that says armor class, and looking at the type of armor that you're wearing, you work out what your armor class is going to be. For example, with Serena, we know that leather armor is 11, plus our dexterity modifier, which is 3, which gives us a total armor class of 14. If we were to equip our shield and use our melee weapon, that would increase by a further 2 for the shield, bringing it up to 16. Now, if I wanted to be clever, I could probably look at medium armor and say, well, you know what, wearing something like scale mail, which gives me a 14 plus dex modifier up to +2, which would be +2 for us because ours is a +3. It would actually be a 16, it would be a higher armor class, and that may be something I want to investigate by buying some scale mail in the game itself. There's a ton of different rules for weapons, all detailed in the equipment section, so I'm not going to be able to go through all of these here. I do highly recommend you check them out, as some abilities refer to particular weapon types and damage types. The key one I am going to talk about, though, because it's going to be particularly relevant to our character, is something called finesse weapons. Now, usually, a melee weapon, such as a sword or an axe, uses strength for the attack rolls and damage rolls. However, any weapon with the finesse property, you can choose to use either your dexterity modifier or your strength modifier, depending on which one you want. Generally, weapons come as simple or martial, and this represents how difficult they are to use to learn, and it affects mainly proficiencies. Melee weapons use strength for attacks, and ranged weapons use dexterity. Now, like finesse weapons provide an exception to that rule with regards to certain weapons with the finesse property being able to use dexterity, there are some thrown weapons which are also an exception to that. Thrown weapons such as a hand axe or a javelin can use strength rather than dexterity, and any thrown weapon which has the finesse property can use dexterity instead as well. So there's a small exception to that. Again, make sure you read through the player's handbook if that's the type of thing you want to use. Now, it's important to note as well that the name and look of the weapons can be altered. You could say have a club, but say that it's a pair of nunchucks. You could have a hand axe and say it's actually a massive meat cleaver or something like that. This is all just something to talk about with your Dungeon Master if you've got a particular idea or a particular look or a visual that you want for a certain weapon. The main thing to note is what weapons your character is proficient with. If you use a weapon that you're not proficient in, you do not add your proficiency bonus to attack rolls with that weapon. So that's an important note there. Now, to work out attack rolls, which we've talked a little bit out, you're going to go to your attacks and spellcasting box, which is right in the middle of your sheet, and we're going to work these out as we go. Now, it very simply comes down to if you are proficient with that weapon, you add your proficiency bonus plus the relevant ability score modifier for that weapon. So we're going to take our short bow, as an example here. Now, we are proficient in simple and martial weapons. We're pretty much proficient in all weapons. So we are proficient with our short bow, so we would add our proficiency bonus of +2. We'd add our dexterity bonus of +3 because we are using a ranged weapon. We're using a short bow for a total modifier of +5. Now, in some cases, which is going to be the case for us, you may also add additional numbers to that from spells, class features, magic items, etc. We have the fighting style archery class ability, which means we get to add a +2 to any ranged attacks. So we're actually going to add a further +2, giving us a total bonus for our short bow of +7 to hit. And we use that number whenever we are trying to hit monsters, and it's simply a d20 roll plus that number. If we beat their armor class, we hit them. So that's pretty much how that works out. Damage rolls are worked out. You check up on the table of weapons what type of damage your weapon deals. So for us, with our short bow, we deal 1d6 points of damage, and it's piercing damage. And this is all information on the table in the player's handbook. We then add our relevant ability score modifier to the damage roll. So if we were using a sword, a non-finesse sword I should say, we would add our strength modifier. As it's a ranged weapon and we use our dexterity modifier, our attack roll, we're going to add our dexterity modifier to the damage roll here as well. So our damage is actually going to be 1d6 +3, which is our dexterity modifier. On your sheet, you're going to see room for 3 weapons, so it's good to put down some that you might commonly use as a quick reference. We might want to put down there for something, example, let's say a short sword in case we get into melee. Now, a short sword happens to be a finesse weapon, so we can use our dexterity modifier. So just to go through the maths once again, we're proficient with it, so we add our proficiency bonus. We would then add our dexterity modifier because it is a finesse weapon, which would give us a total of +5. We don't have any class features, spells, or abilities that would increase that further, so we simply have a +5 to hit. A short sword, looking at the table, deals 1d6 points of damage, and as we use dexterity for our attack roll, we also add our dexterity modifier here on top of the damage for a total of 1d6 +3. And that is pretty much our first Dungeons & Dragons character created. There is an optional second sheet where you can store more information about your character's history, their appearance, abilities, treasure, but I will leave that for you to fill out. That's definitely going to be more personalized to your particular character. As a one last thing, we chose to make a fighter, so we never really went over spells and spellcasting and how it works in Dungeons & Dragons. One of the options for the 3-page character sheet is a spell sheet. I highly recommend you read through your class in detail to understand exactly how your spellcasting, preparing spells, and learning spells works. This is different for almost all of the primary spellcasting classes, so you really must read through your class and understand it. It would take me a whole other video to go through it. It may be something I do, but please do read through it in the player's handbook, because, as I said, each class is different and handles it in a different way. The spellcasting character sheet, though, I will roughly go through this. You will see it has room at the top for noting down your spellcasting class, your primary spellcasting ability, this will be noted in your class features, your spell save DC, and your spell attack bonus. Your spell save DC is what monsters need to roll on their saving throws to overcome the effects of your spells. If they roll under your spell save DC, you affect them with your spells, and the spell goes off. If they beat it, then there's normally an effect on if they succeed, they do this, or it simply doesn't work. To work out your spell save DC, which is what, as I mentioned, this is what monsters need to beat your spells, so you need to work this out, use the following formula. It is 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your spellcasting ability modifier. So, for example, ours could be 8 plus 2, which is our proficiency bonus at level 1, and then let's say, intelligence was our spellcasting modifier, we would add plus 3 to that, or whatever our intelligence modifier happens to be. To work out your spell attack bonus, this is worked out almost as if it was the same as a weapon. It's simply your proficiency bonus plus your spellcasting ability score modifier, as well as any bonuses from magic items, spells, etc, etc. And you use this to make attacks with spells. There's a few cantrips, there's a few spells later on which will have you make a ranged spell attack or a melee spell attack. And again, you'll need to make sure you read up on these. The bulk of the spellcasting sheet is a place for you to write down what spells you have learned or prepared. One thing to note is that each level of spell, you have a box to record your total slots for that spell level per day. This is all noted and explained in the relevant class section of your player's handbook. Please, I can't emphasize it, make sure you read through those. It's very useful as a player if you understand how your spellcasting works, so you don't have to constantly keep asking or wondering if you've used too many spell slots, etc. Highly recommend you read that. But otherwise, that is pretty much us done. And there you have it, friends. That is your very first Dungeons & Dragons character created. What did you guys make? Did you make a dwarf wizard who doesn't like drinking, a dragonborn rogue with an obsession of cakes, or maybe a gnome barbarian with a Napoleon complex? I'd love to know what you guys made. Let me know in the comments below. Share it with all of us here at Tabletop Weekly. I'm sure we would all love to hear what kind of characters you make. If you like this video, or if you found it useful, do me a huge favor. If you'd love to see this channel grow, if you'd like to help more people get into Dungeons & Dragons, if you'd like to help people create their first characters, please do share this series on Reddit, on social media, on Facebook, on forums. Do just spread the word. Hopefully it's really helpful to people. Sorry it took so long to get this final part out, but hopefully it's been really useful. It will be useful for people in the future, get more people playing Dungeons & Dragons, and then ultimately we all win. Thanks very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe if you go in for that sort of thing. Basically, may you always roll high, may your magic items never be cursed, and I hope you have lots of fun playing D&D. I will see you guys next time. Thanks very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.